talking about today is about ideas that release potential. And specifically in an area that I'm interested in now, having worked with all sorts of different companies over the 20 years that Pearlfisher has been going, which is low-tech innovation. And how I see that, very simple but powerful, effective ideas that are flourishing in essentially what is becoming rapidly a high-tech world, which we've heard all about today, and it's fantastic creativity. But by and large, a lot of the high-tech innovations that we're seeing do tend to be aimed to, frankly, the audience that's here today, people in the Western and developed worlds. And one of the things I'm going to be showing you is how, let's think about those developing worlds where they don't have access to anything like what we've seen today, and think about the enormity of the problem that is there. So Pearlfisher, I started 20 years ago, and it's been a roller coaster ride. 3 partners, and now we're 2 studios, London and New York. And as I said, we've worked with a variety of different brands, and it's been a pleasure to actually sort of see how different companies react to creative thinking and really want ideas to really make the world a better place. And that was a phrase that came out earlier. Why design something if we're not going to make something better? And that can be a small product-based idea, or it can be a completely societal shift that can benefit from design and creative thinking. My first client 20 years ago, and I'm still working with them today, was Green and Blacks, is Green and Blacks. And 20 years ago, it was a husband and wife team that made up Green and Blacks, Joe Fairley and Craig Sams, and you may know those names. And what was interesting about those 2 was that they had a shared love of chocolate and food and good living, organic, and also fair trade. And Craig was a real pioneer of linking all of these things together and created this kind of little brand that was up on Portobello Road that we, as a fledgling design company, spotted and thought, that could be made better through design. And we embarked on a journey with them, which has had 6 or 7 iterations to bring it to where it is today, where you see it in every store in the UK, and if you go to America, you'll see it there. It's throughout Europe. And it's been a roller coaster ride because really they were the first people to innovate in a low-tech kind of way. They mixed their ethics for fair trade and a strong belief in organic foods with a great product. And the question was raised earlier, can you tell where your coffee comes from today? Well, any great Green and Blacks consumer will be able to tell you, I know that the cocoa beans come from Belize. And if you talk to Green and Blacks, they'll be able to tell you which plantation it comes from. So in a way, this may seem like old news. And frankly, it is a 20-year-old story, but it spawned a generation of imitations and brands thinking about, in a good way, that are thinking about ethics, sustainable issues, and great product. And when you think now that it's a several $100 million brand, and that's probably outdated figures, and it's now owned by Kraft, and on that journey, it kind of persuaded Cadbury Dairy Milk to go fully fair trade. That's the influence of a challenger brand that is making a really powerful impact, and it's coming from within. It may not be a mission to be a challenger, but it's coming from doing things differently in a very creative way, and really my job has been to brand it and make it desirable and seem like the everyday indulgence that it is to everyone that loves Green and Blacks, and give them an ethical pat on the back from the consumer point of view. Now, I like to think that the success of a brand like this pricks the conscience of a company like Kraft to think about their other brands, and that's the power that we see with types of brands like these. And Green and Blacks is on a journey really from being a sort of challenger brand to hopefully one day being iconic. And there's a lot of hyperbole around iconic brands, and I'm not going to bore you with that. But the challenger thinking is interesting to me because challenger brands are really kind of the types of brands that like to disrupt and do things differently. And they do it from the core. It comes from within, and it permeates their culture. And it represents itself in a product or a service and so on. And they are interesting because when I've worked with challenger brands over the year, they match you pound for pound creatively. And it becomes quite a task to actually provide them with some fresh thinking. When we look at various challenger brands, and we heard Dan talking this morning, I mean, Innocent has had the you know, has held the mantle for challenger thinking for quite some time now, and frankly, quite right so. They do it very well. And they innovate from us, I think, from my perspective, a strong sense of values and what they believe in, and what they believe is right. And they, of course, they make it desirable to you through a multitude of their activities. And we heard about the Bubble Hat initiative this morning, the Great British Knit, and I think that's a tremendous example of low-tech innovation, making an impact and drawing your desire towards that brand, and you know, building a lot of success for that brand and love, quite rightfully so. Help Remedies is a client of mine in New York, and they are turning single-handedly out of a three-man operation, 3 streets up from our studio, the healthcare consumer brand sector upside down, by reframing how you think about when you have a headache, or when you have a blister, or you have an ailment. You go into a Target in America and you'll see these beautifully presented packs that kind of make you feel calm about your problem and actually help you identify what you actually need that meets your solution. There's a whole array of products. And it goes counter to the visual graphic language of that sector, which is bright colors, silvers, and aggressive glowing red dots of pain. And it speaks to you like a human. And Jamie Oliver, somebody else that I work with a lot on different products and brands that he has, is tremendously a powerful figure and understands his draw, and what he can do with that is changing people's perceptions of how to eat and encouraging us all to do things differently, not just based on a taste and indulgence point of view, but from an ethical point of view, which is about passing on the knowledge to people to make them live and eat better. And his Better Food Foundation that we've been involved in, recently just launched, is a great example of challenger brand thinking, making everyone, the food institutions, the supply chain, consumers, think about how to eat better. And ultimately, over time, they become, you know, more than just a challenger brand, and they can become on a journey. They can become much bigger, maybe more idolized, in which case you have a sort of like an iconic start of a relationship that starts to build with people. They become timeless in your mind. And Waitrose, I think, is a terrific example of a British retailer who totally understands that it's a complete top to bottom relationship with the way that they organize themselves. The employees own the business, and that's an idea that was put in decades ago that is still alive today and will be alive in their future. And it's a sort of timeless, modern, contemporary idea. When you are asking that person in Waitrose, you know, where the balsamic vinegar is, you know, they're going to take you to that aisle and they're going to ask you if there's anything else they can help you with. And that is because they understand that that is the level of attention that they can bring to that brand. And it's not just about that. It's, you know, when you're in there, in that store, whichever one you're in, you will notice that the aisles are a little bit wider, they're a little bit brighter. There's a lack of clutter, and all of that has been considered to really create a sort of a design experience that isn't expressed like that, but which embraces a much better response for you as a consumer as you're doing your shopping. And of course, it links all the way through to the supply chain, where the suppliers are treated fairly, and all of this is wrapped up in the Waitrose way, as it's called, and you can read all about that. But it means that brands like this become iconic, but challengers and iconic brands share this sort of real strong sense of enduring love. You are drawn towards them, and it's this sort of imperceptible bond which can be quite fragile. It can be broken very quickly, and it's a challenge as challenger companies grow, and the pressure from, say, new ownership or shareholders to deliver greater returns in the short term can squash the kind of innovative thinking that made them special in the first place. And I see this happening over and over again, but you know, many companies survive this transition, but many don't. And I work with a lot of mega brands, and over the years, and I've seen company cultures that own brands, and they don't have a creative culture, and yet they talk about innovation. And it's not necessarily a deliberate Machiavellian thing that exists within some of these much larger organizations, but it is a problem that when you become you know, of a certain size, and you are perhaps you know, shareholder driven, and you have short-term returns, that the pressure to innovate is actually unrealistic, and you have multi-layers within these organizations, and you have people in departments which are given innovation titles that are buried way down in an organization where they aren't actually able to make an impact. And combined with that, you have legislation and all sorts of things, which means things like when you think about drug innovation, these are the costs associated with developing a new drug and the time it takes. And part of that is driven by regulation. Of course, everybody wants a drug to come to the market that's been fully tested, but that's a huge amount of money for a single drug. And it's meant that from an innovative point of view, there isn't really that much innovation in the drug market. It's become incremental developments because it's become so prohibitive in terms of costs, and perhaps my argument is against the innovative culture to actually produce good ideas. And if you look at kind of companies like these are the types of annual spends that go into R&D. And no doubt there are good ideas that do make it to the market. I'm not saying that there are no good ideas that come from this, but the counterculture of short-termism, layered kind of departmental thinking within these big organizations, perhaps the lack of innovative thinking from the very top means that you don't get the kind of progress, the immediate progress that perhaps the developed world, well, and I mean the entire world, deserves these days. So where's it all going? And I kind of tend to sort of use this kind of phrase, that it's the amounts of money that are being spent on innovation to go nowhere, or the time it takes to bring something to market, is called the great corporate innovation swindle. There's huge amounts of money. And if that huge amount of money was perhaps reappropriated or thought about in a different way, or channeled into things where it is most needed, maybe we would start to see some of the kind of the brilliant ideas that are being talked about today channeled to the most needy, and really make a big difference. Now, these big corporations understand that one of the biggest areas of commerce for them is the developing markets. And they understand that India and the BRIC markets, Russia, Brazil, India, China, and so on, other economies which are coming on very fast, are huge opportunities for them. So innovation gets geared for these economies. And in many of these economies, there isn't an awful lot of disposable cash in the pocket of these people. There may be more cash coming into the market, but they may not have an awful lot. And what that means is typically is that reverse engineering of innovation gets put into typically single-serve sachets, because that is all, for instance, a single tenement dweller, a slum dweller, or somebody who's very poor can actually afford one sachet of shampoo from a company of the likes that we've been talking about. Now, that's fine, that's meeting those market needs, but is that really innovation? And I suppose really looking back at those challenger brands that I've been talking about, where I've seen the most success is where there is a person or a corporate culture, if you like, that genuinely fosters creativity, where progress is made. And these are the types of kind of environments where those kind of single-serve sachets are sold to. And it's just worth understanding that there's like 1 billion people living in conditions like this in the world. So what's interested me is the people with the ideas and the cultures that make things better. And where we see the immediacy of some of the ideas, we've seen that channeled into something that really kind of makes an impact. And it's the idea of analog ideas. There's nothing wrong with analog ideas. There's been a lot of talk about digital, and that's great. But how do we take that into a slum dwelling? And how do we kind of give the people what they really need, whilst the issue of that type of problem is sorted out on a bigger scale? Now, I've met some very interesting people over my 20 years, and about 5 years ago, I was introduced to this man. His name is Dr. René Haller. He's an environmentalist with a Swiss background, and he lives in Kenya, and he operates on a strong environmental belief that environmental and sustainable practices can be linked to commerce, and how that can help people improve their lives. And I was introduced to him by our director of the Haller UK Trust Foundation, Louise Piper, who is here today. And he made a big impact on me because these types of principles, these types of goals, to kind of join all this together, people, natural resources, and sustainable thinking to improve livelihoods, is a really, really powerful modern idea that isn't talked enough about and isn't facilitated enough. And what really impressed me was seeing this. This is a cement quarry just outside of Kenya, and just outside of Mombasa in Kenya. And it's a cement quarry, and this is typically what happens, which is the local cement company goes in and digs out a mile-long chunk of Kenyan ground that is Jurassic coral that has been dug out and turned into cement and leaves this big scar. And René has worked out a way to turn that into that. And he does that using all the kind of principles that we've been talking about. And the story of how transformation works starts off, with, as usual, with the smallest thing. And his mantra is, think big, act small. And he worked out that if you were going to regenerate a cement quarry, how to do it would be to put the right kind of vegetation in there. So he knew that the only type of tree that grows in coral is a tree called the Casarona tree. And it has needles, it grows fast, it grows about this high every year. It grows into the rock, it splits the rock apart. And it has needles which fall onto the ground. And you can see the needles kind of there. He's bending down and digging a few needles. And underneath those needles is that little red-legged millipede. And that's the key to it. The tree and the millipede work together. The needles fall down. The millipede eats the needles, and its poo creates compost. And once you get a little cycle like that going, you get wildlife coming in, you keep water in the ground, and very quickly, after 3 years, you've got a lush, thick forest of trees, taller than me. You bring in communities to get involved in thinning those trees, managing the land. You've got firewood that can be burnt. You've got kind of a whole sense of commerce. And the poor people that live in that area have benefited greatly from that. And this, on the image of the lush rainforest that you can see there, is the first one he did 25 years ago, just outside of Mombasa. It's called the Hala Park. If you went there, you thought you were going to like a rainforest park that has been preserved for thousands of years. It's 25 years old, and it started off like that to begin with. So incredible joined-up thinking how you can get resources out of the land, use people to make it happen, local communities, and it's created commerce. And when I started getting involved with the Hala Foundation, I gradually sort of found my sort of creative skills sort of being pretty much taken from me, and it was a nice thing to be part of it, and actually to put some shape around what the Hala Foundation stood for. And it was this idea of releasing potential, low-tech ideas that can release the potential of resources that are there, people resources, environmental resources, and promote economic growth. And that was the idea of what you put in is what you get out, and was the sort of was a synthesis of all that thinking that created the identity. But so it's not just about land regeneration. It starts off with water, as always. You need willing and able communities. And these are some of the activities that we do. And we show communities how to, we have a model farmer training center where we show them how to develop barren land with water retention, so simple dam projects. We introduce fish, we show them simple fish farming techniques, so they have protein, they reduce malaria. We then show them how to grow food, which they can have to live and then sell. And all of that it works well because you then get biomass, which you can then turn into biogas, and you can start to create sustainable livelihoods. And I think that is a very, very powerful low-tech idea, showing communities how to come together, use creative and joined-up thinking to sort of spread in a sort of like a viral kind of way. The Farmer Training Center is in fact a physical open source sharing place where we bring people and we train them how to become farmers. But the thing that made the most impact on me recently was some of René's thinking. He's moved from the outlying city areas, and he's now thinking about those slums that I showed you pictures of, and is really about, as usual, one of his ideas, making a good idea grow. And for me, when I saw these figures, that currently there are 1 billion slum dwellers in the world, and that's a typical African slum, and that number is going to grow to 2 billion by 2030. And when we see an iPhone launch like we did yesterday, you think, well, how privileged I am to have that technology, but I take it for granted. And a lot of these great ideas that we've sort of seen, how can we actually improve the conditions of people living in these livelihoods, which spread disease, crime, and so on, and keep people inhibited from releasing their own potential. So it was really, the problem is highlighted by the fact that you get a lot of migrant workers that kind of drift to cities, and they come there in a big hope of, that they're going to be able to kind of find work from these outlying areas. So villages get disrupted and communities get disrupted because of the draw of the big city. And this is why these slum dwellings are growing. And when you get trapped in this urban kind of nightmare, the very little disposable income that you have, 80% of that goes on food. And if you think, you and I, we spend probably 10 to 15% of our disposable income on food, and we have a lot more. So it is a real problem how to address this need for food within these kind of within these conditions, when people are foraging like this, maybe even be growing stuff in places like that. So what's the Hala low-tech innovation? And this is what I'm here to explain to you in the remaining 5 or 6 minutes, is to provide all these resources for people living in slums. And it's the idea of linking a series of ideas, and I'm only going to show you 6 out of about 30 that we showcase in our model slum food garden, which is in Mombasa. And really, so I'm going to start and just run you through these different ideas. We show people how in these slums, how to grow fruit and veg and herbs and poultry, and just using garbage that's been discarded. And you can see here a very simple kind of racking system of vegetables that are growing and herbs, and the things which they can grow for themselves and actually then sell on to other people in their immediate surrounding kind of slums. It's amazing what you can give reuse to. An old plastic bottle or an old container can grow stuff overnight. The great thing about these areas is actually the soil is very rich, and if you just go outside of the city just for a little bit, this is all freely available to bring it back into your area. You can grow things, and you can grow. You don't have to depend on drugs that you can't have. You can grow basic medicines, so things like aloe vera and other herbs which have a medicinal purpose and which are well understood but may have been lost in the transition from breaking down these villages at the outlying areas of Africa as they come into the city. We re-educate the people about what these benefits of these various plants can do. And we show them how to keep poultry, breed poultry, using old bread boxes, boxes which we can convert into cages. If you can start breeding poultry, you can start selling it. And the average price of a chicken in one of these slums is about £3, which I guess goes to show us as a global price for chickens. But it's kind of a way to draw people in, create a microclimate, a microeconomic climate which can flourish. The second idea is how to make a fish farm. You may think, what is he talking about now? How can you make a fish farm in a slum? Well, it's very easy. Again, using discarded containers, and this is all over the place. We saw that shot earlier of that African guy standing on a tip of kind of high-tech rubbish. Well, all around the areas are things like this, freely available, which can be repurposed. And so we create a racking system where at the top, the water starts at the top, and as it trickles down, it goes through the various beds where you've got plants growing. So as it goes through, the water is being filtered through into the plants, allowing the plants to grow. And that comes down and falls into the fish tank where the fishes are, which provides them with, as I said, a source of protein. And all the water from the fish, which then has got their waste, then just trickles down into another layer of charcoal and earth, and then that is simply pumped back up to the top using a very simple solar-powered pump. So it becomes a completely recycled kind of purpose. Idea 3, how to use 2 of the most freely available resources around us, sunlight and waste packaging, to create fresh water. Very simply, one thing that's in abundance over there is plastic bottles. If any of you have you just look on our beaches in England, you'll see plastic bottles here. In Africa, they're everywhere, and in these by the roadside. Sunlight is a great filter. The UV, or rather, great sterilizer, and the UV that comes from those sun rays will just burn through the plastic and sterilize any germs that are in there. So all we need to do is to show them how to collect rainwater and create a source of that, which of course we do. And there, after 10 hours or 12 hours of being in hot sun, you get fresh water. How to use a little solar energy. We take recycled solar panels, and we install them. We show them how very simply to wire these up. So, you know, who was making those kind of kits earlier, maybe you can take some inspiration from this. And that drives the pump for the fish farm. It creates light, which is great because obviously, you know, if you can keep people inside a tenement in the evenings, children, you're keeping them off the streets and reducing their exposure to all sorts of violence and other kind of incidents of kind of crime that can happen, and protects the future for them, and maybe they can study more doing homework. There are schools in these environments and places of learning, and if we can keep them at home and encourage learning, then maybe that's a good investment in the future. We show them how to keep things cool. Typically, the temperatures in these places can rise to, you know, over 40 degrees. And we show them how to make a very simple fridge using charcoal, which is, you just get the embers from a fire, and you just wrap them in a mesh. Again, this is all using freely available materials that you can find. And you can see the charcoal there under a mesh. You just pour a little bit of water on that mesh, and it cools the ambient temperature of what's inside that box down by about 5 to 10 degrees. And, you know, that can just make you keep food a little bit longer, make it a little bit more pleasant to actually sort of live. And heat inside these tenements, and this is what it looks like inside one, this can be a major problem and can contribute so many early deaths. Just simple things like creating air passages, showing them how to create a flow of air through their tenements is a way to kind of increase airflow, which will increase their general standards of living, which of course can only be to the benefit. And lastly, how to use waste to create a biogas energy supply. And this is, you know, Dan talked about, you know, holding, you know, poo earlier. You know, one thing that's freely available is a lot of cattle shit in those areas and other vegetative matter. And we show people how to mulch this up. And it then gets poured into one of these oil drums, which has been converted, and you shortly after that it ferments and you get biogas that can be then simply siphoned off into a very simple cooker, and then you're able to cook food without having to burn food, which is obviously burn a wood. So you can help reduce kind of foraging and stripping down of any plant life, but also increase the quality of what you are able to cook and when you want to cook it. So these things may look, you know, like a million miles from your lovely apartments and houses and whatever, and they are. But they share the same needs that we have, and these are creative ideas to lock everything together to really kind of make it a powerful kind of force. So this is about a self-spreading, low-tech innovation showing how to create and maintain slum food gardens. And we bring people in to show them like this, and our idea is that we take that and we apply it so that we can take it from a localized area, affect this kind of thing in Mombasa. We have plans to spread this around the world so that places where other needs like this exist can benefit from this type of thinking. We don't want to own it as a name or a brand. We want to give it to the world. And I think it's René's thinking which has so inspired me as a designer. So last slide, I just wanted to finish up with this. Again, we're still in Africa, and you may look at this and relate this to the previous kind of images. Actually, this is the Singita Lodge, which is Condé Nast's #1 destination in the world, and it's being built using sustainable practices, mud walls. It can be collapsed and taken away if it needs to be, and not touch the earth. And those very same simple environmental principles that are linked to economic development, if you like, are wrapped up within this. And it kind of goes to show that really thinking in a low-tech way, what could we do if we repurpose some of those billions or millions of dollars to really make an impact to communities? And we've seen ideas how we can do that. And if we did that, we can start to think about how we really kind of make an impact using freely available resources. And there's a phrase that's used in luxury kind of branding, you know, that today's luxury is a commodity of tomorrow. Think of it the other way. Think about today's commodity could be the luxury of tomorrow, especially for people that are living in those conditions. So I wanted to say thank you, and hope that was inspiring. It's inspired me. It's a pleasure to be involved with the Halifax.